Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Teacher Talk with Doc Rocker. As always, I'm your host, Russ Downey, and with me today, as always, is Danton Arlotto of Doc Rocker Music. Danton, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going, Russ? I'm good. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good. Enjoying the fact that it's early March and it's still snowing outside today. So
Yeah, yeah, you gotta
it's
love March. It's 50-50. It's either lovely early spring weather or it's just still weeks of shoveling snow. Only in
absolutely
Pennsylvania. Here
no
we
in
go.
between.
So, what are we talking about today?
Well, this is Bits on Pieces, part 3. So this is our third episode of it. And we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to head back to talking about just one single song versus our last episode of Bits on Pieces when we covered 3 separate tunes from different forms of multimedia. Today, we're going to be talking about a song by one of my favorite bands, and the song is Turn It On Again, and the band is Genesis. And I'm definitely wearing the shirt with the album that it came from on.
Oh,
So
nice.
we're going to be talking about this today for 2 main instruments, basically, for piano and for drums. And part of the reason we're going to talk about it is that this song is a really great example of teaching some not quite so easy concepts in an easy to follow package. So, for example, we'll be talking about for the keyboard part, we'll be talking about use of Lydian chords, use of mode mixture with all major chords to make to make the main melody and the riff, if you will, and also talking about the particular keyboard that was being used for this song. And on the drum side of it, we'll be talking about the concept of working with mixed meters and how to draw a straight line through them and switching back and forth between different time signatures seamlessly.
Yeah. This song is definitely a great introductory song for like right as you have like your older kids, maybe like your high school age, that are getting into that more advanced, where they have a solid foundation of all their major scales, their different chord progressions. It's a really good transition into like here's some more progressive music that you could try that's a little bit more challenging and engaging. So we're gonna break down this first component. We're gonna break this whole thing down into 2 episodes. We're gonna focus on all the piano stuff first, and then we'll switch over and we'll be uploading the drum component of this separately. So stay tuned for that to come as we post these later in the week. So let's dive in and start, shall we? Do you have
I
the
do have the
recording
recording
pulled
ready to
up?
go.
Okay.
So we're going to take a listen to it. And let me go ahead and get this moving real quick here.
Yeah.
And you'll also see the cover of the album here as well. So there we go. There's the
Oh,
cover of
good.
the album. And we're going to take a listen to it in parts. So let's go ahead and let's kick this off. And here we go. And I'm going to stop it right there before we get into it. And one of the things I wanted to talk about here was the fact that our intro is in 4/4, and you kind of hear all the main constituent parts that are going to be going along with this song throughout most of it. There's the drums, there's the electric grand piano, the Yamaha CP70, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. And if you've noticed, it's not a bass, it's a synth bass part, played by a Moog Taurus pedal, if I remember correctly, and the guitar as well. So that's the main instrumentation for the song, and it really doesn't pull any punches besides that. Um, Danton, any thoughts so far?
Yeah. So another key component that is really consistent in so many of the different progressions in this song is that idea of like a pedal bass note. There's a lot of, so this is a really good example for you teachers. If you're talking about lead sheet and you're teaching your kids how to read lead sheet notation, this is an awesome example because you're going to have so many slash chords, D over C, E over B, A over B, all these different chords fitting in to make the riffs that are really iconic in the song over these pedal bass tones in the guitar part and in the bass part. And for any of you, if you're at a school where you have the opportunity to work as like a rock band coach where you're putting bands together, this is a really nice song to teach, especially if you have a more advanced piano student and a guitar player who's a little more of a beginner. Give them a simpler part where they're just chugging away those pedal tones, and you can let the piano player carry more of the weight of the chord progressions. So it's a
Exactly.
great smorgasbord of teachable content.
All right. And you make a good point about the pedal tone thing, and you're going to see that continue throughout this song and through a lot of Genesis's late 1970s and 1980s content as well, due to it being a 3-piece by this point. All right, here we go. Let's continue. And I'm going to stop that right there again before we hit the chorus. And one of the things that, like Danton mentioned, there's a lot of different stuff here in terms of great concepts. And we mentioned mode mixture at the beginning. This is a great example of it. So one of the main part of the song, if you will, comes from the piano and the guitar, but makes a great use of chords that are not all in the same key that we're working in. Our pedal tone here is in B, and we're using chords from our B major scale, but they're not all from the B major scale. So there's two main distinct parts. The first one uses E, A, B, and F sharp major. And our second one uses, I believe it's G, A, D major, and I think there's a C in there as well. So Dan, I don't know if you want to go ahead and demonstrate that. I'll go ahead and close the screen share so you can share your screen for this one.
Yeah, well, I'm not even airspeed. I'm just going to switch over to my piano. I got it all queued up here. So I'm using a Yamaha MOX F8. That's my main bread and butter for teaching lessons and for a lot of this content here. So I have just a basic CP70 chorus sound that's built into it that sounds pretty close to what you hear in the Genesis song. So yeah, and another thing that makes this really, really accessible for that like late intermediate, early advanced level piano students is the left hand is just, you could really easily just pluck away with that thumb. You could do both octaves if you wish, if you want something a little meatier sounding. But yeah, it's all right hand work, and it starts right away. So we have E major over the pedal tone B, A, second inversion, so it's voice led, and then B major, second inversion, so you're moving by step, and then, so you get some real cool crunchy stuff when you put all that together. And then it's the same shape with a different set of chords. So here, G major, A major, back to G, D major, voice led to A major via second inversion chord again. So it's a lot of chords that fit this real narrow range, so it's real easy to connect everything real quick. So again, going through it really slowly, it's a really, really great teachable piece to talk about things like voice leading, to talk about things like, well, this chord comes from the B major key as the fourth. This comes from the B minor key as the seventh, the natural seventh. Then you have your B major, your tonic, of course, your dominant over your tonic in the pedal, which is a little crunchy. And then borrowing these other chords for the second half of the riff are all borrowed from the minor key. Your lowered sixth for G, your lowered seventh again for A, and then your lowered third for D major, the relative. So it's a great mix of that whole, like how, and not even just in Genesis, but in so much rock music, the lines between major and minor are so often blurred that I really literally teach this song as the key of B. It's just B. It's not really definitely B major. It's not definitely B minor. There's too many elements of both keys represented so frequently that it's really hard to really kind of teach it as a specific major or minor key.
Exactly. And this song is a great example of, and as you may have noticed, and Dan pointed out as well, all of these chords are major chords that are being used in this main riff, which is interesting because even though it's coming from, some from the minor side and some from the major side, we're getting a mixture of chords that sound like they fit and don't quite fit, but contribute to having a more rich harmonic language than just using 1, 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, it's a lot more colorful.
Exactly. And as you'll see when we go to the chorus section, we have our first use of a true minor chord in here, but we have some interesting use of chords and a little bit of extension as well. So let's take a listen, shall we? I'm going to go ahead and re-enable the screen share. And, oh, my bad. There we go. Let's try that again. We'll have to cut that out. Here we go. All right, I'm going to stop that real quick before we get too much further, and we'll get a chance to talk about that chorus section that's going on at that particular point. So as I mentioned, we're starting to get our first minor chord, or use of minor sounding chords in there as well. We wind up using a G major chord over an E, which basically gives you your E minor 7. And we also wind up using a D over top of that E, which is kind of similar to what we did before with the D over C in the other sections.
Just so that you could see it on the piano. It's another good teachable moment in this piece. When you're starting that first part of the chorus, you can teach this as a couple different ways. You could, the way that Russ described it, is explain it as a G over E, and then a D over E. Or you could use it as an opportunity to teach about extensions, where like if this whole thing, if you're equating it to your bass note E to give it that E minor, you have a lot of viable extensions here. Notably, first of which is your 7th, which is the D. But then if you factor in the notes that are in the D major triad and compare all that against an E minor, you have a 9th and an 11th. So you could use that as a nice moment with your kids to explain what extended harmonies are like and how they work in a song. And how he could have easily just... And it would sound really similar, but throwing in just those little steps and creating those little extensions makes it so much more colorful and interesting. Because you get to hear some of that dissonance. Your extensions rubbing against the bass note especially. And then that D major chord, still in second inversion, works really well for this guy. Which I always like to teach. The simplest way I like to explain that is I label this as a Lydian chord. Anytime you have a major chord that's a step above its bass note, so like C major, keep C in the bass but move up to D major, you get most notably that F sharp, which is unique to a C Lydian scale. If you're thinking of all your different modes, comparing, something like Ionian, which is just your natural major, or your Lydian scale, which raises the 4th to give it a little bit more of that kind of mystical quality. I like to describe it with my kids. And just that alone gives you, you could, again, you could always get into all of the extensions here, your 9th, your 13th, you could say it's a C major 13 sharp 11, technically that's right, but it's much easier to lead sheet label it as D over C, and to describe it as a C Lydian chord. And anyone who studies modes and is familiar, at least at a base level, with the different types of modes and how they vary from major and minor, they'll understand what you mean when you say Lydian chord. It's having that raised 4th to give it that distinctive Lydian sound. So it all comes together really, really nicely.
No, and you're exactly right. And that's one of the things that that I love about this song personally is the harmonic choices that Tony Banks, the keyboardist from the band, makes when he writes these riffs, essentially, is that these aren't terribly ridiculously complicated chords with really weird voicings. It's really extensions almost by default of just changing up your bass note with a different triad up over top of it. And it gives you a much richer tone than just playing triads with the root as the bass consistently.
Absolutely.
And you're right, it's a great way to basically introduce extensions and kind of introduce these more dissonant, not necessarily dissonant, but more complex harmonies without muddying up the waters of explaining okay, it's this particular degree and this one and this one, this one. This is what it is, but this is how it's basically perceived. And I like the idea of talking about it as a Lydian chord because that outlines perfectly, okay, there's a sharp 4. And that's the easiest way to think about it. All right, let's take a listen to the another part of the song, shall we? Here we go. I'll go ahead and share this again. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop that there real quick because we're basically at the end of what we've already talked about in the song. The rest of the song itself, which I'll play a few seconds of, is basically the outro chorus. And I'm not even sure if I can call it an outro if it takes up at least a third of the song. So if anything, the song is very formulaic. And in that sense, it's not a terribly complicated form to teach your students. There's basically three main parts to worry about. And the outro of the song is basically the chorus, but it's also the verse progression as well, which is very convenient. So I'm just going to let that play for a few seconds so you can hear what it sounds like, and then we're going to transition over to the next section of what we're talking about. I think that's enough to get the general idea of what's going on there. Now, that basically takes us to the end of the song, but there was one other thing I did want to talk about that is a small thing, but I really like in the choice that they made and how they established like the overall feel of the tune is the concept of constantly, with one main exception, running an eighth note subdivision underneath the entire song, which for those of you that are, composers out there or enjoy writing music is one way, and it's an easy way to add a lot of momentum to the songs that you're writing. Now, it may not necessarily make a more complicated bass line, but it does add a lot of motion to a song, which is another thing to think about as well. Well, Danton, we ready for the next part? We're going to take a look at some of the drums and talk about some of the mixed meters and how they draw a straight line through all of that.
Yeah, and I think using the eighth notes is going to be a perfect way for us to segue into that.
Exactly.
So thanks so much for watching this harmony component on all the rich chord progressions in Turn It On Again by Genesis. So stay tuned. We're going to get into more of the rhythm and meter based concepts as well in the next video.